Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where you can create the life you crave. With me, Dr. A, as a psychologist for over 30 years, a transformational life coach, and an expert in self-empowerment, my life's work has been inspired by the beautifully powerful resilience of the human spirit. We will share stories and successes of people who have not only overcome personal adversity, but have used their traumas and hardships courageously as a springboard into greatness. Create positive transformational shifts on your way to achieving phenomenal success. Get ready to level up as you move beyond the challenging terrain of your life's journey into the empowered living zone. Ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision, the Empowered Living Zone show starts now. Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where we explore self-empowerment, personal growth, and the journey to becoming our best selves. I'm Dr. A, your host. Now, you all know I love a great adversity as springboard into greatness story, and we have a powerful one today. Today, we will not only hear about Connie Smith's story, but she will also share how her life experiences have shaped who she is and how she serves in the world. As the founder of HighFive PR, Miss Connie is passionate about supporting small businesses, particularly those with innovative ideas or missions centered around community upliftment. Her entrepreneurial approach is driven by creativity, hope, and commitment to helping others achieve their goals. Because Connie has such a deep understanding of storytelling, particularly in contexts involving social issues and underrepresented communities, Connie is absolutely gifted in compelling narratives that resonate with diverse audiences. Her 20 plus years of experience as a top TV producer and publicist gives her an edge in managing media relations and executing effective PR campaigns. And there's more. Miss Connie's lived experience as a foster child, foster parent, and advocate for marginalized voices gives her a profound understanding of the foster care system and the social issues that impact underprivileged communities. She uses this knowledge to uplift others and promote positive change through her work in public relations. I'm so excited to have you here, Connie. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a lot to listen to, but thank you. I appreciate
Well,
it.
let's start off with your story. What I would love to hear about are what are your key life experiences that have shaped you, have cultivated your gifts that you share so graciously with the world. So tell us about yourself.
Wow. Do you want me to give you like my quick version of like how I ended up in foster care or just like little tidbits?
Be great to hear the story. I'd like to hear the whole story. It's a good
Okay.
one.
Well, and I've gotten really good at like the condensed version. So pretty much my biological mom was mentally ill. And when I was, I think 6 weeks or 8 weeks old, somewhere around there, she tried to end my life one night because I was a colicky premature newborn baby, and she was experiencing a postpartum depression, and she had a psychotic snap. Essentially, she was 29 years old and on her own, and she tried to get me to stop crying. So she literally chucked me and tried to chuck me up against a wall. Thankfully, I landed on a sofa, and she realized, wow, okay, I really don't want to hurt this child. I just can't take care of her. And she had a lucid moment where she picked up the phone and she called her nursing aide supervisor at the nursing home that she worked at and said, "Hey, I don't have anybody else to call. Can you please come pick up this baby?" So the woman, her name is Ruth, and her husband's name is Dick. They picked me up, and they were in their mid 50s, And I don't know if they realized they were going to have a newborn baby for, and raise this child till she was 10, but they did. The custody was dealt privately because my biological grandparents were well off and there was a substantial trust fund. And so my biological mom's attorney set up a private custody arrangement. I don't even know, I've never even heard of this. Nobody else has ever heard of such an arrangement happening, but it happened. And so, from 0 to 10, I'm raised in, uh, like a middle income, neighborhood in Pontiac, very diverse. I was the only white child in my neighborhood. Majority of my neighbors all worked for General Motors, were either engineers or line workers, and I went to Catholic schools, so there weren't a lot of questions asked, but people knew that we were different and a little strange. And so in 1990, my family got in trouble for animal hoarding. And so it made not only the front page of the news and the local TV news programs, but it hit National Enquirer. And it was just a really, for me, that was a pivotal point in my life where I was like, wow, how we were living was very extreme. And I knew it was different and weird, but I didn't realize to like the magnitude of how extreme my living situation was. And so social
What
services
happened?
jumped.
What actually happened when you were on National Enquirer? I mean,
My
did you get a
gosh.
lot of bullying or unwanted attention from neighbors or community members or peers?
That's a really good question because as I look back, I can remember riding in my dad's 1988 Ford Bronco and looking out the rearview mirror and having people throw things at our car driving through the neighborhood. And prior to that, I mean, nobody blinked an eye. It wasn't uncommon to have what looked like grandparents raising a grandchild. Even though I wasn't their grandchild, nobody batted an eye at it. And I was kind of like this feral neighborhood kid who just kind of rode her dirt bike all around and, hung out everybody's houses or ate a second dinner at somebody's house because it was interesting. But that was the turning point. You hurt animals or you hoard animals. People don't take too kindly to that. And so we were kind of chased out of the neighborhood a little bit. And shortly after that, social services jumped in and were like, hey, who is this child? How is she connected to you? Because the family I was living with were not licensed foster parents. And so they jumped in and said, hey, you need to go live with your biological mom. And so I did. And that was the pivot point in my life to where I am now.
What was it like? I mean, so virtually these parents were all that you knew. And then at 10 years old, you're taken from them, which, it doesn't matter that they were not biologically related to you. You saw them as mom and dad. So first and foremost, you're taken from your home. And I wonder what that impact was like on you, Connie. And then you were placed back in the home of a mother who had mental illness, and your first experience or go around with her was very serious. I mean, she could have harmed you pretty drastically. And so what was it like to leave your home and go into the home with your biological mother?
It was scary. I was very scared, very nervous. I wasn't quite sure what to anticipate as far as my care. The stories that had been told to me were that I was too much for her as an infant, and I, the extreme news of like my coming into the world and how I was put into care I was never sheltered from that. um and I think too, because of her mental illness, and in the 80s we as a society were not well informed about mental illness and mental disorders. We never came at her with the level of empathy and compassion that she required. Instead, there was fear. So she was always in the background at birthday parties, at my first communion, but there was a level of fear there. And the fear stems from like the not understanding, how her brain operates, what she wants in the world. I always just kind of looked at her as like, wow, she's stimming and it's scaring me. Why is this person making, these weird noises or movements. And I always thought, oh my gosh, she's going to want to kidnap me or take me away. And so then I end up in her home, and essentially her and her boyfriend, her partner, were just grown up children. And so I'm a fifth grader at this point, and I'm living with her, pretty much taking care of myself. And they're robbing me of my lunch money so they can just go out to dinner and drink coffee. Like, they're not doing anything crazy. They're not like doing drugs. They're just big children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. So, it's interesting. This might sound like a crazy question and may catch you off a little off guard here, Connie. By the time we're 10, we already have core truths. And what I mean by core truths is that we have impactful life experiences. And from those experiences, we make up stories about who we are and how the world operates. So at 10 years old, you are taken from your primary home with Ruth and Dick. You're returned to your biological mother, who sounds like she suffered from a pretty significant mental illness. And you are now recognizing that you may be the more mature person in this household. Do you have a sense at 10 years old? Did you already have some core truths? Did you already have some stories that you told yourself about you or how the world worked?
I feel like because I was an only child too, and I was being raised by older adults, that I felt that I was free, but freedom came at a cost where I really had to learn how to take care of myself and watch out for myself. Like, my parent figures were not play figures. They weren't going on bike rides with me. They weren't taking me to the park. They were caretakers, but I had to have a level of street sense, so I think for me, one of my core truths was just that I had to be very aware of my surroundings, be very aware of myself, and to be very, to protect myself.
Okay, so by the age of 10, let me see if this is a fair statement to make. The fact that you had to be aware, kind of vigilant, and take care of yourself, do you feel like did you have a belief that you couldn't trust anybody to take care of you? Did you have a belief that the world was unsafe? Did you have a belief that I got to just depend on myself? I mean, do any of those resonate for you?
Not wholly. I think if anything, I was more apprehensive. I was just very
Okay.
curious. I
Mhm.
think I continue to ask a lot of questions about people, and I always was very inquisitive.
Okay. Okay. How do you feel like that helped you? I mean, that's a natural gift, right? Curiosity, not, we don't all have it. And it sounds like that was a gift that you were endowed with in coming into the world. How do you feel like curiosity actually helped you through these adverse circumstances?
Well, I've definitely learned that, you can't judge a book by its cover, right? Everybody has a story, and we have so many layers to us. And I knew that I had a lot of layers, and I did not want to be taken for granted, even at 10 years old. I didn't want somebody to look at me and just assume that I was fine. I had to learn to really pipe up if I wasn't fine. I learned how to read a room and find out what everybody was into so I could assimilate. Like, there is that common thread between people who've experienced trauma, that we learn how to read a room, and we're really good at figuring out who we need to be and how we need to mask. And I very much mastered that, but I also learned that I wanted to be perceived as normal. And so I would learn what everybody's stories were, and I kind of would make up my own. So for a long time, I was a really good liar as a child.
Wow. So you would make up stories that you felt like would be acceptable to the people that you were with, that you're hanging out with.
Oh, for sure. And I wanted a different life. I was very angsty and very upset that I had the life that I had, because I felt like I wanted and needed more.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So then what happened once you went back to your biological mother? So this is at 10, then what happens?
So I spent the first half of a school year there, fifth grade. But every day after school, I'm like, I'm not in a hurry to go home because home life is no fun, and these people are kind of scary to me. So I start staying and working in the office with the principal, Mrs. Janowski, and she would feed me Arby's or whatever the fast food choice was that day. And I think we went at this for like maybe 3 weeks, and she was like, "Connie, we can't keep doing this, honey." She's like, "I don't want to call social services, but I think it's time." And so social services enter the picture once more, and they're like, "Hey, you are healthy, the home looks fine." And the CPS worker's probably thinking, "I have seen much worse." She's like, Your only option here is to go into actual foster care." She's like, "Do you want to do that?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And this is December 19th, 1990. So essentially that date is very important because that's the day the school districts close for Christmas break. That's the day the court systems, they all shut down for the holiday break until like, January 6th essentially. And so I go to Children's Village, which at this point it's a juvenile detention center, and so they're getting ready to close up shop, and they didn't think they were gonna get me a home, and sure enough, they got me a home. Like, I wasn't afraid that I was gonna stay at this juvenile detention center. A woman comes, her name is Mary, and she is short and little and Italian and loud, and her son, who is very charismatic and thinks he's a comedian, they come pick me up and they get me laughing all the way back. Like, the journey is from Pontiac to Berkeley, it's about 20-minute drive, and so I'm just cracking up all the way home. Like, I'm scared, but I'm also laughing, and so I felt right at home right away.
So this was going to be your new home.
Yeah, and I stayed there until, well, and my foster mom, Mary, passed away 6 don't like 6, 7 years ago.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Actually, it'll be 8 years. It'll be 8 years this December.
Wow. So at 10 years old, you went into this new home with Mary. It sounds like you had a foster brother. How about a foster father? Was there a father present as well?
No, she was widowed.
Wow.
So she had entered her foster care journey with her husband while he was still alive, and they adopted a little girl and had been fostering. And then he had a heart attack and passed away. And she just kept doing it because she just didn't want to be alone.
Oh, wow. And how long were you with Mary?
I was with her from the point I was 10, almost 11 years old till I graduated high school.
Wow. Okay. So you basically aged out of the foster care system.
Yes, I aged
Right.
out. And then what's interesting too is like I literally like when you think of aging out and kids having to leave home, that was me because Mary, she was a senior citizen and could no longer physically keep up with a house. So she
Mhm.
sold her house, moved into a senior citizen apartment building because she just was having a hard time taking care of herself. And so she hooked me up with a rental property, and my then boyfriend and I moved in together while I was going to college.
Wow. Wow. So what was your overall experience like with Mary and your last foster care stop? What did you learn there?
Well, that's a mixed bag of truths there. You know what? I definitely learned how to be a servant from Mary. She would be poor as can be and give you everything she had still. Like,
Mhm.
so in a way, I had to really put boundaries in place as an adult because I learned that Mary had no boundaries. I learned that she is a lover of people, and needed boundaries for herself. And had she had better boundaries, she would have been better protected. But there was just a lot of love in that home. I was raised by an Italian family, and so it's, all the holidays are big, the traditions are big. You have to have enough food to feed an entire city. I mean, so those kinds of things. And just really just the love. Like, she was a believer in Jesus, and she really hated going to church, but she was like the hands and feet of Jesus. Like, so that I think when I think of her, I think of that number one. But she had 2 out of her 3 biological sons were addicts. And so there was a lot there that I was still very upset about. Like, I was robbed all the time. I mean, not in any kind of violent way, but I worked hard and my stuff would go missing.
Mhm.
Um, so that was really disheartening. So I don't know, it's a lot. There's a
Mm.
lot to unpack there, but I mean, overall, I was never physically abused. I was never sexually abused. I dealt with a lot of issues that I think a lot of Americans, lower to middle class Americans deal with, really.
Mhm, mhm. When when you think you look back at this experience, I mean, you are, and I know that you understand this. You are fortunate in terms of the experience you had in the foster care system, and there are a lot of children out there that aren't as fortunate as you are. I know that when I worked at the Children's Hospital in Denver, Colorado, I mean, I got to witness firsthand some of the failures of the foster care system, and the casualties can be quite big. It's actually very disheartening. So you were fortunate in that regard. When you look back at your experience at being rehomed, you know, what would you say was the hardest thing about that experience, and what would you say was the greatest gift of going through the foster care system?
I would say there's 2 parts to the hardest things. The hardest for me, the hardest part was to make a decision when I was 12 as to who I was gonna live with permanently, because nobody had criminally done anything horribly wrong besides hoarding a bunch of cats. And that's, that's a subject for another day, for another podcast, talking about animal hoarding and the mental health issues there. But besides that, I was never hurt by any of these people, whether it be my biological family, the first foster family, or the second one. So at 12 years old, the judge is like, "Where do you want to go, kid?" And so I chose to stay with Mary, but I asked him to keep it a secret from everybody, and I asked him to take the blame because I didn't want to live with that guilt of letting somebody else down. So that was number one, definitely the hardest thing that even 32 years later that I still think about. But the second hardest thing is I was an only child from 0 to 10, and I entered a home where I had to share my stuff. I had to share attention. And I had a foster sister who was just a few months older than me. And, we're estranged now, but, she was a gift and a curse at the same time because we fought like cats and dogs, but it was so fun to have somebody to share this experience with who also got it.
Mhm. Wow, wow. And what would you say is the gift? The
Oh,
terrible
wow.
gift?
You know what? No, I think that the gift is that I the gift is the chaos. The chaos is the gift. Because I lived through the chaos and could witness compassion and empathy and servitude, I am able to see that come out better because of it and offer that to the world, like in the most humble way possible. Like I think about it like this. Jeremy and I, my husband, became foster parents right around COVID. And there were so many stories of people just, thinking about, ending their lives or being super depressed or having no purpose. And here we are, we're like up to our eyelids in purpose. We're like taking care of humans. And we were really grateful for that experience because I think it could very well swing, the pendulum could swing the opposite way.
Mhm, mhm.
Like
Yeah.
I know that I'm just grateful to feel like I have to take care of people like my mother did.
Okay. So that's one of the things that came out of this is
Yeah, I think so.
the importance of
Because I
taking.
think naturally I want to be very selfish a little bit. And so that's the one thing I learned, to be more selfless.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Great. All right. Well, Connie, we're going to take a quick break. And
Yeah.
when we'll come back, we'll talk more about this. I'm curious to see or to hear how you translate the tough stuff that you went through and how that's made you who you are today in terms of the gifts that you share with the world. So we'll take a quick break. You're listening to the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and my guest, Connie Smith. We'll be right back. We are back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and my guest, Connie Smith. Now, Connie, I'm going to ask the big question. A lot of the listeners who follow me know my story, and, my big motivation or inspiration is it doesn't matter what you've been through in your life, you can still shine and you can still take up space in the world and have an impact. And so what I'm curious about is, you've shared with the listeners your story, and clearly, we can read between the lines and know that there were probably lots of things that were hard and challenges in your life and struggles. And, one thing that I wonder about, again, this is kind of an interesting or weird question, is when you think about what you've been through and the tough things that you went through, how does that translated, or how have you used it? Like used it. I always talk about the springboard. We go from adversity, using that to spring into something that is great, that is greater than you, that is a great expression of who you are and what you show to the world. I'm curious what your story would be. What is your greatness story?
Oh, oh, wow. Well, I will say, so in high school, I took an aptitude test because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I don't know about other kids who grew up in foster care, especially in the 80s and 90s. College was not a big conversation piece around our dinner table. Pretty much it was don't get pregnant and don't go to jail. Like those were the basic, expectations. And I met those, thankfully, um, for high school, anyways. Uh, and so on my aptitude test, it came up like, oh, you'd be a good fit for law enforcement, for being in radio broadcasting, and oh, I think working with animals. Well, I was fatigued with the animals, after living with, lots of animals. And so I job shadowed a FBI agent, and I job shadowed a radio DJ at like a local radio station. And I fell in love with the art of broadcast. And I thought I wanted to be on the radio or on TV. So fast forward, I ended up working in television news. And so here I am in a newsroom, and the majority of us are white, and the majority come from a middle class, upper to lower middle, well, let's just say middle class backgrounds. And I live in Detroit, and so Detroit is one of the blackest, cities in all of the United States. And so we'd be, hearing the scanners and getting in all of this information and writing the stories. And the one thing that resonated with me was how underrepresented our city was as far as from journalists. And then when we'd have small businesses on TV, how underrepresented our businesses were locally. And so I knew that when I got into public relations, that I wanted to make sure that I was here to represent the community at large, and and how the community actually looks. So that was one way where I took, and how I was able to have the background lens for that is because I grew up as the only white kid in my neighborhood. My point of view was completely different from those that I worked with. So that's one way where with my company now that I tried to be very mindful about who I take on as clients and the stories that I share, because I want to make sure that there's equal impact for everybody out there. But also too, coming from where I come from, where it's more impoverished, foster care, all of this, like I just I'm able to speak for others, or at least be able to be a good listening agent for others, and to help put them in the right, point them in the right direction, because I'm pretty well connected. I mean, that's my job. So I just like being here. If I can't help you directly, then I'm a good middle person who has a lot of empathy for you.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that is kind of floating in my mind, Connie, you said this earlier. You said, I was really good at making up stories because I wanted to fit in and I didn't like my story and I wanted a new one. And so you said that, I was a really good liar as a kid. And one of the things that I wonder about is thinking about translation. One of my experience of you is that you are very gifted at storytelling. I don't think I've ever known a person that can just on a dime, come up with a beautiful story about a particular person or situation. And I'm curious if that's something that you recognize in yourself as a gift, that this is a gift that you have.
I don't know. You know what? I love words of affirmation. That is my love language, but it's also hard to hear and also hard for myself to give to myself. And I think so. Like just being a storyteller, it's something just really resonates with me. Just being able to just filter in the information and spit it back out. So, because for many years working in television, when people are like, oh, what does a producer do? Well, I'm reading a ton of books, really, they're news articles. It's like doing 20 book reports a day. I'm taking in all the information, I'm processing it, and I'm spitting it out. And I think that, and the process of doing all of that, you pick up on patterns, right? Like your arcs in a story. And so by picking up the patterns, I'm able to take my client or the person who needs their story told and to help them find the value and the arc in their story, so that way that part resonates with somebody else. And the beautiful thing about storytelling is that that's how we all connect with each other. So I always tell my kids and other clients and pretty much everybody around me, and this is what I've had to learn. I guess if I break it all down, that I've had to learn to be vulnerable. So coming from this place where my husband would call me a BS artist when I was a kid, of making up these stories so I can assimilate, what really I've been good at is, oh God, I lost my train of thought. So just storytelling, just being able to convey the information in a way that is entertaining and informational.
Yeah.
So like, whether it's your story or a client story or for television, just being able to take in the information and make it relatable. Oh, the key is to building relationships is being vulnerable. And so that way, if I'm vulnerable and you're vulnerable and that we've connected, now we've built some trust.
Hmm.
I had to
Yeah.
learn that the hard way. That particular skill I had to learn the hard way, and it wasn't until I was probably late 20s, early 30s that I added that skill to my repertoire of talents, and that's when I feel like I cracked the code.
Interesting. So it's funny that you brought up vulnerability because as you were talking about it, it was like, I can't imagine growing up the way that you did and vulnerability being a gift. I mean, as a matter of fact, you had to be probably guarded and protected. And, one of the things that I'm thinking about is in terms of translation is, the hypervigilance, the being aware, being able to read a room. When you think about that, that comes from a place of trauma, whether it's a capital T trauma or a little t trauma. Usually reading rooms and hypervigilance comes from some form of trauma in childhood. And, we think about that as a bad thing. Yet, as I'm hearing you talk about your gift as a storyteller, this skill is key to that because you can read the room, you can read impact. You talked about empathy and compassion. All of these things are the powerful elements of a great story. And so that's awesome. Now, the vulnerability thing I'm kind of curious about because you said it came later in life.
It
So in
did.
your 20s, what was it? What experiences did you have that led you to the importance of vulnerability as a skill?
So I, for myself personally, felt like in my 20s, I was learning how to survive, learning how to, pay rent, pay a mortgage, pay utilities, all of that kind of stuff. And also, I'm working in a professional environment and I'm trying to assimilate. I'm buying, I'm making a better salary now. So I'm trying to look fancier because I'm working with people who are on TV and they're fancy. And so I learned really fast that that left me feeling empty and kind of yucky. And also, like, I was um, spending way too much money. And that's not who I really was. And I really just had to figure out, who am I? I'm trying to put on, I don't know, I was thinking like putting on other people's skin, but that sounds weird. But like, how I'm trying to take on other people's identity. And I really just had to sit back and be like, what is my identity? Because for so long, I was this foster kid, or I was a young mom. I had my first daughter at 21 years old, right out of college. And I was a mom, but I never had the chance to stop and think about who is Connie. And so once I took a beat and figured out who I am and made peace with it, and then made peace with the fact that everything that happened in my life, besides my own personal choices, were not my fault. It's like that scene in Good Will Hunting when Robin Williams comes at Matt Damon and he's like, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault." I felt like I was having that internal conversation, that reckoning, and I was able to let go. I was able to let go of this being guarded about my backstory, being guarded about my anything that I felt like I lacked, even though, certain things I'm still sensitive about to this day. I'm not as guarded as I used to be. And I learned that I was able to make better connections with people by being 100% real. Which I laugh about because, yeah, no kidding. But when you come from a situation where you have family members in and out of jail or family members in the news for making bad choices, I never wanted that stuff associated with me. So I really sugarcoated my life, and learned that the things that I felt were my shortcomings weren't mine to claim to begin with. So by owning my story, I really just was able to let my star shine.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a very powerful, it probably wasn't a moment. It was probably a series of moments, but it sounds like what was really powerful for you in your 20s, Connie, is that you became free
Mhm.
because you let go, you believed that other people's choices were yours and reflected who you were and your value. And so I would imagine there was a lot of shame involved. And when you got into your 20s and went, wait a minute, I didn't make these choices. If I didn't make these choices, then why would I believe that they're a reflection of me? So it sounds like that was a really big pivot in your life, recognizing those are their choices. I get to make different choices. And it sounds like that bumped up against other experiences of I can just be me and I can own my story. I love Brené Brown's. I don't know if you've heard Brené Brown's her phrase around this. You can either spend a lifetime hustling for your worth and running from your story, or you can actually own your story and own and experience the power that you can have in your story. And I think that's something that's really important to me, Connie, is, there is so much power in our being when we own who we are, warts and all, that we own who we are and we stop running. And it sounds like that's what happened for you. That was a pivotal moment in your 20s.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was really like late 20s, early 30s, but all of the bad choices I was making when it comes to like hanging out with people and drinking too much, or big purchases, or just not paying attention to my money, I had to come to a reckoning, like, is this because of a lack of education? Am I spending more money because there's an emotional void? I had to really do a lot of inner work on all of that. And I had to learn too. I don't know what I don't know, but I can make the choice to learn it. So, and even though I didn't have as much education as a lot of people around me, the library is free. YouTube is free for the most part. So I went to work, and, I love to learn. And so I think that's the difference between those who let their story own them, or they make that choice to own their story and go further, right? So you have to make peace with it, and you have to decide, who am I going to be now? Am I going to let this define me, or am I going
Mhm.
to take it, I'm going to nod at it and be like, okay, we're here, and move on.
That's great. You couldn't have said it more perfectly, Connie, as you're saying this. It's like, many of us experience some pretty significant trauma and adverse circumstances, and we have a choice. We can actually succumb to it and just kind of fall into that pool of adversity and get paralyzed and get stuck in it, or we can actually use it. We can use it for momentum, whether I refer to it as the springboard, or we refer to it as a pivot. It's always a choice. What am I going to do with this experience? What is here for me in this experience? And sometimes, particularly for those of us, and I will put myself in this box as well, is when you go through childhood trauma, you don't have a lot of power. But what can happen is, as you grow up and you become wiser, you can look at those traumas and you can say, what's here for me? How can I use this to make myself a better version of who I am? And nothing that happens to us can cut us at our knees unless we allow it to. And I think that's really important for the listeners to hear, is that there's nothing holding us back but ourselves, and certainly our stories are not, unless we allow them to. We're gonna take a quick break, Connie,
Okay.
and when we get back, we're gonna dig into some more cool stuff that I'm really excited about. So you're listening to the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and my guest, Dr. Connie Smith. Excuse me, Connie Smith, not Dr.
Oh.
Connie Smith. And we'll be right back. We are back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and my guest, Connie Smith. So, Connie, I have a big question to ask you. Nothing
Okay.
like putting you on the spot. You know, we all know Gandhi. You know Gandhi. He's one of my favorite guys. He had a saying that has really touched me, and I think it's a really important thing. And he said, "My life is my message." And for all of us, we're not any different than Gandhi. Our lives are our messages. And so when you think about your life and you think about what you've been through and the experiences that you've had, and you're sitting here today, and you were to think about your life as your message, what would you say?
Wow. That's a really deep question. I would say that life comes full circle. I mean, that seems very cliche, but I can go a few different places with this. I started out in foster care, and here I am as a foster parent about to adopt three beautiful children. And, somebody asked me, like, why don't you write a book? And maybe someday I will, but, I'm waiting for the like, what is my overreaching arc? What am I trying to teach everybody? But you can make, lemonade out of lemons. So, just every foster kid grow up to be a foster parent? No, not necessarily. I mean, you have to have the means to do it. And I really feel like we're not meant and destined for just one passion or one purpose in life either. Like, I am a staunch believer that you need to find multiple things, or you do you, whatever it is, you do you. But for me, I know that, I lived through two different foster homes and was able to come out the other end okay. And for me, it was just important to pay it forward. So, in one way or another, and I didn't intend for it to be as large as it is. Another message is you can do hard things. Don't count yourself out because of your upbringing. Just because, I had a humble upbringing and at one point I was in line for government cheese doesn't mean that I can't achieve whatever it is that I want in life. You are your only roadblock. It's just you. And that was a really hard lesson for me because there was a really long time in my 20s. I was super, super angry with the whole system and my whole childhood. Like, I was even thinking about suing the state of Michigan and like the attorneys behind my privatized custody, because I was like, that wasn't right. I was a healthy baby girl. Somebody would have wanted me. I should have been put up for adoption because I was so angry with my childhood. So, sometimes you have to take a step back and take a deep breath and figure out, who am I and what now? What skills do I have? What am I dreaming about? And do that. Go there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you had mentioned, I'm curious, with your current experience, you chose to become a foster parent, and you have three fosters that are on their way to being adopted. With your experience in the foster care system, what was your motivation or your inspiration for wanting to be a foster parent yourself? What do you want for
Well,
these kids?
wow. What I want for these kids ultimately is I want these three children to grow up knowing that they were loved and they were chosen. First and foremost, they were loved and that they were chosen. And any day, we have lots of days that are hard here. And I make sure that they know you are here because I choose you and I love you beyond anything else, because I'm going to fail every single day. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to get the wrong color skirt out or whatever, but I love you and I choose you. And it is an effort, sometimes big, sometimes small, but I love you and you're chosen. And my foster mom made sure to tell me that every day, no matter what, that she chose me. And when I would get bullied for being a foster kid, and primarily because I think kids don't really understand what that means, my mom would be like, well, tell them at least your mom has a choice. Um, my family is very sassy, but that's what I want them to feel. And however it shakes out, it's going to shake out. And I try to be just in the moment and just take it day to day with them.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's interesting. I mean, I think that's wonderful that your foster mother, Mary, would tell you, I chose you. and I love you because, in the work that I've done with children, whether they're put up for adoption or they are placed into the foster care system, I even see these as adults. One of the emotional casualties that I witness is they're feeling like they've been thrown away, like they have no value and they've just been tossed aside or thrown away. And it's a very impactful belief. And you probably know this, and I experienced this with working with children, is typically children in foster care systems do not feel loved. They do not feel like they belong. They do not feel like they're chosen. And so I would imagine that that was a tremendous gift that Mary gave you. Did you believe it? Did you believe it?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Because and I had there was actual physical proof there. Well, number one, I was taken care of and she loved me and I got hugs and snuggles and all of that. But there were children who came in and out of our home all the time. And they were placed in foster care who would go home, who would come back. I was there. I was there for the long haul. So like she lived it every single day. So there was not a doubt in my mind, and I was probably a really easy foster kid too. No, I'm just kidding. Not that that's the kids' fault or, none of that, but, yeah, I was there and, for a long, long time, and she chose to, keep her home for a lot longer than she, intended to and, put off retirement because I was still in high school, and
Wow.
so
Wow. Were you her final foster kid to go through the
yeah,
home?
I was.
Goodness. Wow. Wow. That's amazing. It's nice that you've got some, I mean, it's great to hear that in addition to the hard things that you went through, you also have some really beautiful things to take with you as well through that experience.
Oh, for sure. She was my best friend. Like my
Yeah.
husband's my best friend, but really like Mary was my road dog, or I was hers. She was the big B, I was the little B is what we would say, joking
Oh.
around. But like one of my favorite memories is like she would always be like, if you drive, I'll fly, or if you fly, I'll buy. She would like to go out to eat all the time. And one time we were driving, I forget where we were going to, she was feeding me a baked potato from Wendy's as I'm driving the car. Like, that is just that's just love. That's friendship, that's love, and, yeah, I'm truly, truly grateful and blessed to have had that experience, to have that lady in my life.
Wow. Wow. What do you think is the biggest thing that you took from that experience with Mary? Like what's the thing that has become part of who you are today?
She was very I think vulnerability. Especially as she got older, she realized that letting out her thoughts and her feelings about who she was and her relationship with her mom and what she was learning about the world or what she learned about the world, she shared that with me. And I share that with my daughters. So, like, it may be an overshare and it may be TMI, but I share with them all of my thoughts, all of my hopes, my fears. And I want to be like an open door for them, for their thoughts, for their fears, for the things that they're excited about. And I just want to be that person for them as I was for my mom and my mom was for me.
That's great. You know, there may be listeners that are listening to this that have been in the foster care system. They could be aged out of the foster care system and struggling with their own battles as a result of being in the foster care system, or it could be anybody who is going through or has gone through really rough times. And so when you think about your life experience and you think about what you've gained from opportunity to give something to the listeners, what do you hope the listeners would take away from your story?
I want you listener take
Mhm.
away, own your story, be vulnerable, connect with somebody. Have a couple people, at least one person that you really could connect and be yourself with. If it can't be a family member, then somebody that you of your choosing, or go shower somebody with some love. If you're like, "Oh, that's good. I can be vulnerable. I can make that connection, but I don't know with who." Go to a nursing home, make a connection with a person there, volunteer your time. And or be a foster parent. just volunteer your love and your time to somebody. Share your story with somebody. And I guarantee you will not be sad. You will not, or I shouldn't say you won't be sad. It won't be a waste of your time. You will not be sad that that you took that time. Share your story, connect with somebody, whether it's a friend, a family member. And if you don't have those, go to your local nursing home, go sponsor a child somewhere and connect with a human, and it will be time well spent.
What's important about that? So sharing your story and connecting with others. From your perspective, Connie, what's important about that? What's so powerful about that? What's been your life experience around that?
You learn, number one, that you have more in common than you don't. You are more alike than you're not.
Mhm.
And I really believe that God, universe, spirit, source, whatever you want to name it, if you follow your heart and you follow that ebb and flow, you will be put in the right place at the right time with the right person. And it's just going to click for whatever purpose it's going to serve. Just be open to it.
You
Smile.
know,
Smile when
it's
you walk down the street and say hello to people.
right. You know, it's interesting. You're not using this word, but I'm going to throw it out, and I'm kind of curious how this will land with you, Connie, as you're describing this. It seems like what's behind it is this trust. Like, just trust, be open, knowing that when you show up and you are yourself and you own your story and you have the courage to be vulnerable, to show who you are, that the trust is about you'll get exactly what you need. And you're not alone. You know, I think a lot of times, especially for many of us, and I'm curious if you had this experience as a child. I know that I did. I know that because of my trauma and where I came from in terms of, neglect and impoverishment and abuse, I always felt alone in the world. And I felt like I was the only one. And there was a long time that I kept my story secret because I believed that there was something inherently wrong with me because of my story. And I was very isolated. And I recognized as I got older and really owned my story and owned the power in my story, when I connected with others, there was nothing that felt more powerful than to be seen.
100%. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
You'll find your people. You will find your tribe once you acknowledge who you are inside and share it. Just
Yeah.
share it.
Yeah. Thank you, Connie. I love your story. I think it's very powerful. I'm hoping that it has an impact on our listeners. And, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope the conversation has sparked new insights and inspired you to own your story and make it your life's message. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from this discussion. And if you would like to work with me personally, please contact me through my website at www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Until next time, stay empowered and take good care of yourself. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Empowered Living Zone show with me, Dr. A, to create the life you crave. Tune in on the first and third Tuesdays at noon Pacific time on transformationtalkradio.com and get ready for another show. Say yes to creating positive and empowering change in your life and move beyond life's challenging terrain into the zone of success. Be ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision in the Empowered Living Zone. For more information on how to do deep transformational work with me and to create the life you crave, visit empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's empoweredlivingcoaching.com. See you next time.